Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
That was a little awkward, wasn't it? Hello and welcome to Jiggers Place. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every other Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time to talk about all the things that don't get discussed on my other three shows. So the things that make life worth living, and cocktails, books, relationships, all those kind of things. It harkens back to the first couple of seasons of the Way to Wow shows when we dealt with all three pillars of attainment on a regular basis and dealt with all the different realms. And so this is a chance as the week is ending to relax, have a cocktail, and talk about these things. So today I'm going to be talking about Earl Biggers. He is the author of the Charlie Chan detective books, and actually I meant to grab my my copy. I will in between making the cocktail and sitting down to talk about it. But Charlie Chan, one of the greatest fictional detectives of all times. And there are some, I think, interesting issues for us to talk about based on that. And so in honor of the great Charlie Chan, with the help, this time with the help of ChatGPT, I didn't have ChatGPT do all the work. I created something called a Charlie Chan martini. So the ingredients are, first of all, gin, and I'm using, this is Bombay Sapphire East. This is different than the regular Bombay Sapphire because in addition to all the regular botanicals, it also has Thai lemon and black peppercorns in it. And I'm sorry, Thai lemongrass, not Thai lemons, Thai lemongrass and Vietnamese black peppercorns. And so it brings a little bit more of the flavors of Eastern Asia to the cocktail. And then I'll be mixing that with some lime juice. So you might argue this is really more of a riff on a gimlet than a martini, but everybody thinks of these things as martinis, but in fact it is really more of a gimlet. And I think I used this 2 weeks ago, the Ginger Liqueur. I don't know about you, but one of my favorite parts of sushi is the pickled ginger, and it's just such a wonderful flavor. And then some orange bitters. So I think last time I used Stirring's blood orange bitters. I do love this a lot, but this time I'm going to use Bitterman's orange cream citrate bitters. Well, actually, no. You know what? Now that I see this, it's like a soda pop style. Maybe I'm not going to use that. I don't think that goes well with this. Let's see. What else do I have here? Something just bumped. I think what I will do is I will use Angostura orange bitters, and that rounds out the ingredients. So I already have my cocktail shaker. There's actually already ice in it. I did that because I was getting a bit of a late start today. And let's see, we're going to start out with 2 ounces of gin. A little trouble getting that open. There we go. Okay, so 2 ounces of gin and a half ounce of lime juice. Now, of course, fresh lime juice is always the best, but I'm just going to use. I'm using this. It's Italia lime juice. It's a very nice lime juice. for something that's essentially pre-made. So 1/2 ounce of that, and a 1/2 ounce of the ginger liqueur. It's getting stuck. There we go. Oh, oops! I just noticed I only put a 1/4 ounce of lime juice in, so I'm going to put another 1/4 ounce of lime juice in to make sure it balances out. Okay. There. And then just 2 dashes of orange bitters. All righty. And as we always do, we're going to shake for a good while. You can see it's already starting to froth up on the outside, but we want to make sure everything mixes well as has a little bit of an opportunity for the for some of the ice to melt, and the water opens up the flavors, as I always say. So we'll keep doing this a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then, unlike previous cocktails I've made, in this case, ChatGPT had an interesting idea for a garnish, which I didn't have. I don't remember what it was. So I looked up things that were like it, and came up with Goji Berries. So I'm going to garnish this cocktail with Goji Berries. Okay. So these come from Dragon Herbs, Ron Teagarten's Dragon Herbs. This is a shop actually just up the street from me I'm not sure if I think it's in West Hollywood. And they have all kinds of herbs and things. My daughter really loved this shop. So I'm just going to put 1, 2, 3, kind of 4 Goji berries in that. And I'm going to give this a little bit of a taste here. Well, that's delicious. Okay, I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so here we are, relaxing, and this is a book I found it in the used bookstore many years ago for all of a whopping $1, and it's 5 of the 6 Charlie Chan novels, and again they were written by Earl Derr Biggers. So you can see the face page there. And it starts with the first one, The House Without a Key, and then The Chinese Parrot, Behind That Curtain, The Black Camel, and Keeper of the Keys. The first one was written in 1925, so almost 100 years ago. In fact, it was published in 1925, so it was likely written the year before. So 100 years ago, and then the most recent one was written in 19
and that was when it was renewed, 1932. So these were all written, in the first third of the 20th century, and so Charlie Chan is a man originally from China who, pardon me, he moves to Hawaii. And by the way, if for those of you who know your history, Hawaii was not a state at this time, so it was an American territory, and it had a very diverse population. There were a lot of white Americans there, but there were also Native Hawaiians there, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos. So a lot of different Asian people came to Hawaii, although most of them were Japanese and Chinese. And Charlie Chan is a detective for the Honolulu Police Department. And so one of the things I think it's important to know about Biggers is, well, if one looks, so the novels were eventually turned into movies. They were made many times, but initially in the 30s, and when some people watch them today, they really bristle at the way Charlie Chan is portrayed. Now, the original actors who portrayed him were white men who were made up to look Chinese, and so but by today's standards, of course, that's somewhat controversial. But also, Charlie Chan, excuse me, speaks in what is, excuse me. So Charlie Chan, even in the books and the movies, he speaks in an idiom that, again, by today's standards, seems almost like a self put down. So, for example, he oftentimes refers to himself as this unworthy one. So he's portrayed with a lot of humility, even self-deprecation at times. But what's interesting is Biggers was very aware of the prejudice against Asians in the United States. And that's one of the reasons it appears that he wrote the Charlie Chan novels, because in many portrayals of Asians, especially during that time, they pulled rickshaws, they operated laundries, these sort of what were considered at the time, and maybe still are today, sort of lowly types of jobs. And to portray him as a detective at a major metropolitan police department, and in fact, the best detective in Hawaii, by doing that, Biggers was trying to show that Asians were the equals of whites, of all people, really, and yet, because of how I think most non-Asian Americans interacted with Asians, so there was a way that Asians behaved. Now, obviously, I'm not Asian. I'm not steeped in Asian culture. So one of the questions I've thought about is, did when Asians behaved with this sense of humility, um, were they doing it while they're kind of winking at themselves? They were sort of having it over on people, or and that's not to say, by the way, that they weren't genuinely humble, but the sort of way they did it, right? One can be humble, and one can be humble, and one can be express humility in different ways. So what was what was the motivation behind that, and then that I don't know, um, but I think that when people see, especially the older Charlie Chan movies today, they look at them and in many cases they're offended, and yet in their time they were portraying Asians in a very profoundly good light, in the sense that they weren't subservient and they weren't obsequious and all these things. They were, doing jobs that a lot of Americans thought, only whites could do. Now, keep in mind, by the way, this predates, for example, oh shoot, the great Sidney Poitier, in The Heat of the Night, where he plays, I think it's Sergeant Tibbs. So Sidney Poitier goes down to the South to visit his mother and gets caught up in what I believe it's a murder, and the sheriff in this little southern town, at first arrests him, and then he finds out he's a police officer, and I believe it's Philadelphia. And not only that, but he's one of the top detectives in that police department. And so then he engages Tibbs to help solve the mystery. And it's a journey for this sheriff from being sort of the stereotypical bigoted small town southern sheriff, to understanding that a black man is the equal of a white man. It's an absolutely brilliant movie, and of course Sidney Poitier, one of the greatest actors of all times, he plays the role just superbly. So, but that was already, I believe that movie is from the 1960s, right? So we're talking 30 to 40 years earlier, and here's Charlie Chan, obviously, fictional, of course, just like Detective Tibbs, but nonetheless being portrayed in a very, especially for its time, dignified way. So I have to have another sip of cocktail. So why do I bring this up? I think there's a question about how do we perceive things from the past in the context of today. In other words, do we judge whether it's artwork, popular cultural things, people, by the standards of today, or do we judge them by the standards of their time? And I think this is an important issue for us to think about in dealing with relationships. So whether we're reading the Bible, where the biblical code, for example, if someone kills a relative of mine, okay, I'm entitled, not kills, sorry, let me be precise. If someone murders a relative of mine, okay, I'm permitted, as that person's relative, to be what's called in Hebrew the Goel Hadam, the redeemer of the blood, meaning I'm permitted to kill the murderer in order to avenge. It's not really done in vengeance, it's done in justice for the murder of my relative, right? Now, Today, in contemporary America, if I were to do that, I'd be guilty of murder myself, because we don't permit murder in response to the murder of our relative. So there are people who will say, well, the biblical principle is barbaric. But in the context of its time, where there were no police forces, we didn't have jails, and the idea of murder even being wrong was an innovation. So the idea that someone who murders has to pay for that crime with their own life was a supremely moral position to hold, right? So should biblical law, biblical practice be condemned because we handle these things differently now? Or should it be understood in the context of its time? And those of you who watch the show, often enough, you can probably guess which side I come down on. I think we have to judge laws, behaviors, people in the context, generally speaking, in the context of their times. Okay. Now, we have to be careful with that, because when we judge it in the context of the times, that doesn't mean that we take an outlying opinion from history and use that to support a heinous act that was done at that time. Okay? So we have to look at the entire historical context of the time, the intent of the action, i.e., was it meant to correct a moral wrong, or was it meant to uh, allow exploitation to continue? Okay, and you might be thinking, this sounds like I'm leading somewhere. I am, right? So for example, let's take slavery in the context of colonial America, right? So some people would say, well, slavery was widespread at that time, and so therefore, in its time, slavery was not wrong. The problem with that argument is, even in its time, there was a recognition that human beings should not enslave fellow human beings. And indeed, in the debate over the Declaration of Independence, right, there was the debate over slavery was one of the reasons why it was so difficult to get the Declaration of Independence agreed to, because there was a profound difference in perspective on slavery between the northern and middle American colonies and the southern colonies, and John Adams, for example, wanted to declare that all Americans, including Black Americans, should be considered free, and that slavery was evil. And I'm trying to think of one of the most prominent Southern delegates, Edgar's Rutledge, who was, I think, from South Carolina. He would not support the Declaration of Independence if it condemned slavery, right? So that's what I'm saying. We have to be careful about how we look at the context of the time when we judge practices, people, etc., right? And so when I look at how Biggers portrayed Charlie Chan, while by the standards of today, his overly humble, obsequious, caricatured behavior rankles a little bit, in the context of the time, for Charlie Chan to be the top detective on the Honolulu police force, and widely acknowledged as such by everyone in the Honolulu Police Department, and indeed by Hawaiians in general, was really a statement of an anti-discrimination statement. And indeed, it's not one of the five here. The sixth Charlie Chan novel takes place in England, or it starts in England anyway. And a detective from Scotland Yard is investigating a murder, and he finds out that Charlie Chan is I think is in England, and he's really overjoyed because he had he had the opportunity to work with Charlie Chan previously, and the case he's working on, he realizes, is so baffling. He needs someone of Charlie Chan's skill and ability in order to solve this case, right? So, again, it's a fascinating inversion of how Asians, in this case in particular Chinese people in Western society, were portrayed and looked at. And so, I applaud Earl Biggers for writing the Charlie Chan detective novels, for creating this portrayal of an honorable, intelligent, highly successful Chinese man at a time when that just wasn't really the way Americans, at least some Americans, looked at the Chinese. And so, as we work in our relationships, and especially as we deal with people who are different than we are, I think one of the challenges is to understand these differing types of perspectives. And look, I can certainly understand how a Chinese American today might be offended by the way Charlie Chan is portrayed. And hopefully, despite our different interpretation of that, we can agree to disagree and still build a solid, meaningful relationship. And that, in the end, is the key. And that's why I raise this issue. So I have to have another sip of cocktail. Goji berries infused with gin and lime, and yum. Kind of like interesting flavored raisins. So this is why I think it's important to examine these issues devoid of their political overtones. So two people getting along and being able to build a relationship, I think that should be able to happen no matter what political beliefs they have. And the ability to understand these kinds of issues in the context of their time, how people might view them today, and understanding them, that's what's important. That someone has a view different than me, don't care. But hopefully we can come to an understanding of our differences and agree that despite our differences, having collegial, even building a close relationship is far more mutually beneficial than arguing and holding a grudge over these kinds of things. So that's the message of again the great detective Charlie Chan and Earl Biggers. If you are a detective fiction fan the way I am, I have a library of, I don't know, I think a couple hundred detective fiction novels. both the sort of more classic style, like Charlie Chan, like Rex Stout, who does oh shoot, I went up on the detective Rex Stout writes about. He has the Brownstone in Lower Manhattan. The Sam Spade detective novels, all of those, to the real hard-boiled detective novels like the Stephen Marlowe and Richard Prather. I read them all, although these days I do prefer the more sort of Charlie Chan and Agatha Christie and all of those. They're not so hard boiled. But if you're a detective fiction fan like I am, I encourage you, if you haven't read the Charlie Chan novels, to do so. They are wonderful to read. They are intricate and incredibly engaging. So anyway, that's our visit for this Thursday evening, or I think on the East Coast it's already about 8:30 at night. So I thank you for tuning in, especially those of you who have tuned in live. Always a pleasure to have you on board. And this is my last broadcast for this week. We'll pick things up next week on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time with Trust and Estates Weekly. My guest is Hillary Cooper, and we're doing a replay of Prepare for Downsizing. We promoted this show a few weeks ago, and because of technical problems, it didn't come off. So Hillary and I are going to get together and talk about that on Monday, and I really invite you to join us. Hillary is a brilliant woman and will really give you some really solid grist to mentally chew on as you contemplate all the stuff that we have around us, and what's going to happen with that, and what's going to happen with maybe our parents' stuff, that sort of thing. And then on Tuesday at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And I'm going to be talking about how you succeed a failed leader. And I'm going to be doing that by talking about how Allenby succeeded in the battle in Gaza after Archibald Murray had failed twice, and Allenby was put in charge of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force and had to come in. And how did he succeed where his predecessor had failed, and failed so dramatically? And then on Wednesday, normally at 10 a.m. Pacific time, normally I broadcast my show, People Making Money, but I'll be doing a special show for Thanksgiving, which is, of course, the following day. And I thought, originally I thought I'll broadcast on Thanksgiving, but you know what? I think it's better we spend the time with our families and loved ones, friends, whatever. And so I thought it would be better to do my Thanksgiving broadcast the day before. And I'm going to be, of course, talking about the holiday, as I always do on these special editions, and then reading you the proclamation that George Washington issued when he was president in 1789. So other than that, one last thing, you'll start to notice next week that on the promotions for my show, you'll see not just the YouTube logo, but the Spotify and Apple Podcast logos. And that's because actually starting with my show with my show on Monday, I'm posting my shows on Spotify now. And my understanding is, because of the Spotify service I'm using, they're being automatically uploaded to Apple Podcast as well as video casts. And so if you're not able to catch a show live, and Spotify or Apple Podcast is your preferred way of watching video podcasts, so check me out there, and love to have you as a viewer there as well. Whatever, trying to make it more convenient for you, my viewers. So, and if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, Would really appreciate it if you consider doing that. I'm working toward getting to the point where I'm in the monetization program on YouTube. Not that I'm looking to make a lot of money off this, quite to the contrary, I'm not. But if I make a few dollars, that helps defray the costs of things like Restream and that sort of thing that, allow me to do this podcast. So would really appreciate your support in that way. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. Wishing you a wonderful night. Sleep well. If you've had your cocktail, that hopefully will help. And have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week. And look forward to seeing you next week. Signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.